Welcome to the Rooted in Light podcast. I am your host, Tuesday Rivera, and I am delighted to have two special guests with me today. We have Katy Milani and Dálida Rocha, which is probably, friends, you all know me at this point. I do the best I can with people. But to be fair, friends, I can't even say my own last name, right? You know that's true. Like it's Rivera, and I'm like, that is not how it sounds when any Riveras say it. It's just how it sounds when I say it. Okay. But what I want to say about both Katy and Dalida is they are fellow devotees of the goddess, and that's why we're here today. We're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like in practice, what it looks like in real life, how our regular old people who are also awesome regular people, how they're going through their life. So Dalida is a community leader, and actually one of the ways she described herself as we were talking right before this is a servant to her community, someone who is deeply invested in making good things happen in her community. She's a mother. She is I think, here's what happens when you say Dalida's name to people outside. They're like, do you know who Dalida is? And I'm like, maybe. I don't know. She just seems like a great person to me. We're going to let her introduce herself in a moment. And then we have Katy with us as well, who is an economic justice advocate, who is also an incredible poet and writer and a mom as well. But maybe we'll just pause. Let me just say, the reason that we're all together is that the three of us share this devotion to goddess, but it looks quite different, right? It looks, if you were in our lives, you would see us doing very different things. You would see us maybe having different understandings or ways that she comes to us. And so I wanted Katy and Dalida here to bring that out, to show the various different ways that it can look like to have a relationship with goddess. But first, I think I'm going to let them introduce themselves and say what they might want to tell you about themselves. And maybe even we could start with the first question, how you came to goddess. So Dalida, would you mind starting?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me Tuesday. It's so lovely to be here with you and Katy. So as Tuesday said, my name is Dálida Rocha. I am originally from Cape Verde, west coast of Africa. Have been in this lovely country for 20 years. No, 24 years. Wow.
Wow.
Time does fly. 24 years.
Mm-hmm.
And and yes, I'm a nature lover. I'm a community leader, and just always want to be servant of my community because I feel like even in moments where I could not recognize it, so much was being poured into me.
Mm.
And now I have the honor, the privilege, and the responsibility of just like returning. So it's constantly in this flow of like pouring in and out, and which just brings me just great joy and just makes me feel so alive. Um,
Mm.
and how Goddess came to me. So it was in a moment of that I was going through a lot of solitude and also turning inwards, which it
Mm.
was just something super new to me. And it was right after my mom's transition, right? My mom
Ah.
transitioned in 2018, and then 2020 happened where
Mm-hmm.
we experienced this global, shutdown and isolation. Um, and as hard it was in the beginning, then I also realized that it provided the opportunity for me to spend more time with myself, even though I
Mm-hmm.
was in a tight community that I don't know how I would survive COVID without that community, but it
Mm-hmm.
just also provided so much opportunity for me to go inwards. And it was a beautiful moment of just like I was in a sacred ceremony space.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there was goddess Oshun who showed up in this beautiful yellow dress, sitting by the river on a rock with
Oh
a
my.
beautiful peacock feather. And that is how she showed up for me. And so much has happened since then, but I have a tattoo on my wrist of a peacock feather and my mom's
Oh,
name and the year she was born and the year she transitioned because it has so much meaning for me.
that's amazing, Dalida. And I want to I want to dive right in. I've got because friends, I've actually not heard this story before. Like I actually don't. I did not know that. So I have questions, Dalida. But I want to ask. I want to allow Katy just to say hello and say a little bit about herself and how Goddess came to you.
Hello. Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here with the two of you. So the first question about, who am I? I feel like that's been one I've been
Mm.
deeply in. It's been hard for me to answer. It seems
Hmm.
like an easy one. So I want to start with that and that it's evolving and it's
Mm.
emerging. But all that being said, I am, by day, my profession, I'm a policy advocate. I worked in government. I work for an advocacy organization working on economic justice issues. That's been like the core of my work around power. Who has it? Who doesn't? How do we
Hmm.
redistribute it? But realizing that I'm more than just my job and my work, and so I'm also a mother, and
Hmm.
motherhood is a big part of me.
Hmm.
Discovering Goddess. It was kind of like odd for me to hear I'm a devotee of Goddess. I'm like, wow, okay. I think just to be,
Does it
but
feel true?
oh, it does. It just was something I'd never like do together. So,
Mm.
it was really like lovely to hear Dalida's story. Like mine has not been very direct. Like I became a mom almost 9 years ago, and that how I described it, I now live in the world of metaphor and the mythic. Like, and that's in part
Hmm.
because of Goddess. Thank you.
Love it.
And when I became a mom, just like because I think this is an important context. Like I've described it, it was like my form, my whole being was like a puzzle, and every
Yeah.
single piece of me slightly shifted. So nothing was in the
Mm.
right place or
Mm.
wasn't in place. I don't know about right or wrong, but like just and it was I'm still in a process, I guess, of putting those pieces in this form that is this new emerging form, which includes more ritual, more mystery,
Mm.
more creation, and creating and my way into God, like to Goddess. And there's one in particular, which is Lilith. That I mean, I can share more about her in a little bit, but it's been through writing. I created. I was like,
Ah.
when I had my kid, my first kid, I just could not hear myself think anymore. And you
Mm.
hear about motherhood, like, oh, it's so you're natural. It comes naturally. And like that was just not my experience at all. It felt very
Yeah.
unnatural. And
Uh-huh.
so all that being said was I had to figure out ways to hear myself think, which was really my intuition, which was also how am I doing this? Like my
Mm.
doing life broadly speaking, including being a mother and a partner and a friend, and also having my own creative expression, which is all around writing and more intuitive writing, which turned into poetry. And it's how I've done all my healing work has been through the written form. And without me even knowing it, Goddess has played a big role in that.
Mm.
Okay, you both said, and I'd love to hear if either of you have anything more to say. It feels like, so Katy, you said I needed to hear myself, right? Like I couldn't even hear myself. And Dalida, you said I had to go inward,
Mhm.
right? I had to kind of get quiet and get still. And I'm curious because we could think about goddess devotion or practice or whatever, or like a relationship with a goddess is actually being quite out there, right? So as a deity, as the sacred, as the divine is out there, and somehow we kind of put out our hand and she reached back, right? But I think what I'm hearing you both say is it was actually going inward that
Mhm.
allowed this to happen. So I don't know if there's not actually a question there. It's more a noticing and then asking if either one of you have more to say about that.
Yeah, for sure. You know, creating space to be with yourself, right, is creating space to be with Goddess, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Right. Great.
when you, for example, I was living outside of my body for so long because it was
Mm.
just, a coping, a survival strategy. I was just like living outside of my body for so long. And then being someone who's constantly in the community and trying to support, um, to be honest, yes, that is what's in my heart. That's what I feel like I was born to do, and I'm happy to do it. And there was a time in my life that I was doing that was attached to my self-worth, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Being a Black
Mm-hmm.
woman, being an immigrant,
Mm-hmm.
someone who came from nothing, was just like it almost felt like I needed to do more to feel like I belong, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So that just it became too busy. Never really had quiet time if it wasn't as a mom of three, and I had my kids 2009, 2010, 2011.
Oh, oh,
But
whoa. Oh, that is a lot of children in a very short
yes.
amount of time.
So not only my body didn't get time to recover, and I was already living outside of my body, busy with just like so many
Mm-hmm.
voices, so many people, reaching for me, that I just like didn't have space to listen to myself, and also it wasn't making space for the goddess to show up, right? And as I think, after the goddess showed up and just like paying attention to everything that has been happening in my life, I was like, she was always there.
Mhm.
Right?
Always there.
Is that the
And it
most
was,
amazing thing?
yes, it's just like, oh my gosh. I remember when I was in Cape Verde, when I would go home from school, sometimes I would literally, most of the time, I would stop by a sunflower field and talk to sunflowers. And I would get in trouble for coming home late because they used to tie me from, like, they knew the distance, so tie me. And then who's going to believe me as a teenager that I was just, talking to sunflowers?
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
that was Goddess Oshun. That
Mm-hmm.
sunflowers is her flowers. So it's just like she was
Mm-hmm.
always there, but I never made space to pay attention.
And
Mm.
wait, Dálida, yeah, right. I mean, like, I think if my 16-year-old came home and was like, no, mom, I was talking to the sunflowers, I'd be like, try
Yeah.
again. I mean, I wish that were true, but try again. But wait, but when Oshun appeared to you, did you know who she was?
No,
You
not
did
at
not know?
all. No, because I was not familiar with goddesses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't grow up in a heavily, Catholic or household, but Cape Verde is heavily Catholic, you know, country because of its, colonization history and all of that. So even though I didn't grow up heavily in a Catholic household, but it was just like it was God. It was like don't worship images, don't do this, don't do
Mm-hmm.
that. So that is what I grew up with. So there was always fear. And so
Mm.
I didn't allow myself to be curious. So I didn't learn about goddesses or anything. So when she showed up, I was just like, first I was, what, who is this and why?
Uh-huh.
And trying to do research,
Mm.
but also a little bit of doubt and creeped in of just like
Yeah.
why me, as if I wasn't worthy enough for her
Mm.
to show up for me. um
Uh-huh.
so yeah.
Okay, we're good. We're getting back to that because that feels like part of the practice or moving into relationship with her. But Katy, I wanted to make sure that you might have had something to say around like listening to yourself or going in or being quiet.
No, there's so much about, I mean, it was in terms of like similar timeline, 2020 was when I was like, I cannot continue doing the way I'm doing things, like big, the way I'm doing things, the way I'm doing it. I literally had a thought that was my intuition saying, this is going to kill you. Like,
Wow.
which sounds, I know,
Wow.
very dramatic, like, but those were the words. And so I took that very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in one way or another, it was going, that would happen. And
Mm-hmm.
so I did the same thing. I got really quiet. I started
Mm.
creating little pockets of time to just be in total stillness and quiet and then write for it was like 5 minutes. It wasn't a lot of time. It was 5 minutes because my kids, they were 3 and 1.5. They were home. My husband was like sitting. We were in a 1,000 square foot apartment. He's sitting in the room next, in the same room working with me, and so it wasn't a lot of time, but I to do it, but it created something in
Mm.
me, and I slowly started to hear myself think and desires. And it wasn't even hearing, it would just come out on the page. Like, I'm like, where did
Ah,
these words come from? Even in my just being quiet, sitting there, closing my eyes, because that's how I would write whatever, once I opened my eyes from my meditation, I would write whatever word came to my head. It was like,
wow.
there's no self-censoring here, because I was at a point in my life where I had self-abandoned so much. Like, I would, even if you asked me what I want for dinner, I'd probably like circle the room to see like, what am I supposed to say for that? It
Uh-huh.
got to that level. And, I would, in these very, like 3-minute meditation, I would turn into a tree. And it just,
Yeah.
I mean, I
Wow.
literally,
Wow.
and it was this really profound experience that then I kept coming back to, because it gave me this little pocket of peace and joy and something for myself. And it was this little like seed that I guess I planted, and it's been, or like a snowball, and I created more ritual and practice around the writing. What I didn't realize, and then back to, there's a lot you said, Dálida, that resonated with me. I was raised Catholic,
Mm.
and I wasn't searching for goddess. I should
Mm-hmm.
say, like that, just to be very clear. I wasn't like looking for that. I wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
All due
Yeah.
respect,
Sure.
goddess.
Oh,
um,
she knows.
and
She's like,
she knows. I was a kid, I remember, and I went to church, I went to Catholic catechism, I was confirmed, and I remember just going along with emotions, but knowing I was like, "This Adam and Eve story makes no sense to me." But I just, no, literally,
oh.
I was like, "This makes absolutely no sense." I would say some pretty wild things, which I'm not sure I'm ready to say on, record live, to my family, and I was like, "That was Lilith." Like, I mean,
Ah, uh-huh.
me challenging the divine masculine, me challenging this archetype of male divinity and male centered
Mm-hmm.
worship, or even just male centered, which is all things. And I was doing that from a really young age. And when I learned about Lilith's myth or story, or even, I use this like language around her myth and goddess and the story, because part of me is like, you know, you can you don't even have to believe it's real. There's
Yeah.
like identifying with the myth, and you can step into the story. There's something about with archetypes, like, Jung and Jungian and archetypes. I mean, I really do believe there's something energetically with goddesses, and they are a mirror of us. But all
Yeah.
that is to say was like Lilith was always there. Like,
Mm.
there's
Yes.
no separation. Like, I am a carbon copy. I mean, I've said that. I think you two are in the room when I have said those words.
Yes.
When I
Mm-hmm.
realized, I was like, I am there's there's no separation between her and me. And when I learned about her story, there are just these really just very specific coincidence, not even coincidence, like specific similarities. Like
Mm-hmm.
the first time I went to the desert, I felt at home. Lilith banished herself to the desert after,
Mm.
Adam and God, she didn't want to be, dominated. I've been so passionate, like interested in understanding, and I have this like keen sense of power, who has it and who doesn't. And that's very Lilith. And anyway, I could say so much more about it, but realizing that she was like always there. I didn't even have to look for her. She was
Yes.
always,
Yes.
It's quite amazing, right?
yeah,
It's just like it's almost like you just open your eyes to see, and there
yeah,
she is. It's
Yep.
quite dramatic and remarkable that once we have an encounter and kind of step on the path, it's like, oh, whoa, there it is. Katy, you used the word power, and this is a question I wanted to ask you both because, we're
mm,
not talking about your work today. That's not why I brought you on. But both of you work with power. Both
mm-hmm,
of you work with like knowing power, working with power, getting
yeah,
power on side, like, and we're
Hmm.
like in big ways, right? Policy, large scale community movement work. And I'm wondering if there's and I did activism for years and do systems change kind of in my other life. And so I'm like, "Oh, we all kind of know something about power and like kind of
Yeah.
in our lives have gone towards it to
Yeah.
change what's happening."
Hmm.
And I'm wondering
totally.
if you see that having any relationship to your current relationship to goddess or how you got into that work or how are you thinking about power and goddess?
It's one and the same for me. Like I can't separate it anymore. I don't talk about it, but when um, but it's funny. There's another goddess that I've been because in advocacy and politics, there's a lot of like warrior mentality. It's like you're
Yeah.
fighting for something,
Mm-hmm.
and it is very like thinking about the male and female. Like it's like energetically very like male. And I've been thinking a lot about, and my whole career, now that I've like reflected and where I see my career continuing to go, is that how do we bring more of that divine feminine energy
Yeah.
to reshape power
Yeah.
instead of like, and using even language differently. So it's not so like fight, it's like, maybe there are instances we need to be doing that. But we also need to be building and creating and
Mm-hmm.
birthing and like like those more feminine and I think that's part of my like why I'm here is to be bringing that to movement spaces because my work is so like I've worked mostly at like think tanks and work with Congress and government. It's like very left brain
Mm-hmm.
analytical. You
Mm-hmm.
need the best argument, right? That
Uh-huh.
with all the facts, and that's really good, and I can do that. But I was so heavily in that, like with like exercising that part of me, that I did feel not as fulfilled. And as I've brought in the more creative and my divine feminine energies, like tapped into like Lilith or other uh archetypes or goddesses, it's made me better at my job. And also it's made me, even though like as motherhood is like the most humbling experience, but it has also made me like such a better mother, and to bring those stories into my motherhood and to understand,
Mm-hmm.
like, because just to say one last point about this is like I always thought motherhood was like these soft, you just keep giving, and it's like,
Ah.
and I'm like, actually the mother destroys.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
the
Yeah.
dark feminine, and I
Right.
know that
Right.
energy, like
Yeah.
that is what I'm comfortable in. And that's why when I became a mother and I didn't know that part of like the mother as
Uh-huh.
the goddess, I think that's why I had a harder time stepping into motherhood. But once I learned those stories and the different faces of like the dark mother, I was like, okay, that makes so much more sense. And it gave me more confidence in I think
Mm-hmm.
it's made me, I don't know, feeling more confident in my mother being.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Katie. It's one and the same, right? And it's so fascinating that when you're, for someone like me in leadership position as an executive director, right? I used to always hear that, oh, I can see that you lean heavily on your masculine energy. And I believe that,
Mm.
right?
Uh-huh.
Mm.
I believed that for so long because people used to tell me like, I can tell your dominant side is your left brain because you're so analytic, you so this and da, da, da.
Mm.
And then and I believed that to the point that I used to tell myself, oh, I'm not creative. Because that to me
Same.
that was like the soft part, right? Like the
Uh-huh.
feminine part. So and I must say that for a while I didn't want to get too close to that feminine side because I was scared,
Ah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Um
Uh-huh.
and so it was so much easier to just continue to go along with what people were saying about like my leaning heavily on my masculine side and just like
Mm.
about business and this and that. And once, I found goddess, it's just like, no, actually, it's
Uh-huh.
not the masculine side that has been dominating. I just been trying to believe that and just like
Uh-huh.
operate in a way, show up in the world in a way that others would continue to believe that it was my masculine side, right? And now I just feel a lot more fulfilled because I show up different, right? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
a lot less fearful because when you're allowing
Mm.
yourself to just like be dominated by that masculine side, or what they say is the masculine side, or just like show up in a way that folks are expecting you to show up, then you fearful of failure, right? But when you
Right.
allow the
Right.
feminine to like wrap you and to just be president, be you, then you just know that, especially when that moment where it's like, she has always been there, right?
Uh-huh.
Then, you're not alone, that, you're wrapped, you covered. So you show up with a lot more confidence, which I do now. And the accountability shows, it's like, it's different. I tell people accountability is my love language because I care
Mm.
about you and I want to be in a
Uh-huh.
relationship where you care about me. So we shouldn't be afraid to go and be like, Katy, you know what? You said this during that meeting. I wonder where that's coming from. So you lean
Uh-huh.
more into curiosity too versus like
Right.
blaming, you know,
Right.
which is definitely something that has been happening with me. Like, and that's how I started Googling about my goddess. Like, it was from that moment on, leaning into curiosity was this big thing in my life.
Uh-huh. So, oh my gosh, I have so much to say. But both of you, so I think both of you talked about having and actually being quite good at kind of the left side of the brain, the masculine piece, like what we as leaders are generally rewarded for, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
clarity, like the sword cut, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus the way of leading that is more collaborative or midwifing. What is that for you, right? And that actually, like you don't ever lose, like you're not less analytical, right? You're
Nope.
not less, but it's like actually bringing in something to be more whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a,
Mm-hmm.
a whole way of moving into our work. And
Yeah.
and what that makes possible. Because I think sometimes, and I absolutely want to get to our practices and I want to talk about mothering here in a moment. But I think sometimes people think they're gonna like lose what makes them or lose an edge or like not be serious by moving into. But I guess that what I'm hearing both of you say is you're actually better at what you do.
Well, I like to think so. But also
We're
but
just gonna say
also
it's true.
but I think what for me is even more important for me is that sh I'm saying what I'm actually thinking, and
Mm.
sometimes the room doesn't wanna hear it
Yeah.
right
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
then,
Yep.
and
Yep.
maybe it's uncomfortable, or maybe they don't quite hear it because it's not like the usual strategic, project management, like, what's your due date, and and I but I feel, like, in my body, like I'm back to this part where I'm, like, emerging into, like, I'm like, "Okay, this is how I'm supposed to be doing the work
Mhm.
and how I'm supposed to be showing up in the world." And I'm, okay with it being a little uncomfortable for people,
Mhm.
because I think I've seen it a little uncomfortable for people.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right? They know you one way, they know what
Yeah,
to expect. This is kind of like, and it's actually quite radical, right? To come in a more feminine, because I think it's two things. It's like quite radical because it's not what we um reward, but I
yeah.
do think people have a sense of the
Mm-hmm.
dark feminine too. Like, well, wait, what exactly are we inviting in if we say yes to this, right? Because we all know Kali, we know different goddesses that like come in like blazon and know this will not be, right? Which
Mhm.
is, can be disturbing and disruptive of a system. Dalida, what were you gonna say?
I definitely think that I'm a lot better. And it's just like just the way you interact with people, they see it. Um and I've always been someone who you know said sometimes just like didn't quite wait. It was like whatever was coming to my brain, I would say it. Um and I realized that I still do that, but um I'm able to be like, I see this person has control issues, and and sometimes I tell, then you having a hard time with control,
Mm.
and like I add something that creates this dialogue between us, and versus just like, let me tell you something, you need to go work on your control issues and walking away, which I used to do, right?
Sure.
But now it's just like you could definitely see that, like that sort of like used to talking about going into mothering, that like mothering coming into but not in a way that is like a cuddling, which
Mhm.
is
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes when we talk about what's the term that people like, the gentle parenting. I'm just like,
Yeah.
nah, that's just straight up cuddling. I'm sorry. You can not building resilience.
Oh, you know what? We could do a whole podcast on that. Whole podcast on that one. Okay, but actually, I did want to ask you both about mothering because it's not lost on me that the stories you talked about when you turned to Dálida, you had just lost your mother, and Katy,
Mm,
you had just become a mother. And
mhm.
so I'm curious both how it might have impacted your mothering and also what this practice, how it might have reshaped your understanding of mothering. So it's like one would be like real practical with your kids, like what's been the impact? And the other is like, has it shifted how you've thought about mothering?
Mm. And this is deep. So I was in 2018, I had lost my biological mom, right? But I wasn't raised with my
Mm,
mom.
okay.
And so it was really hard because I was trying to understand my feelings around losing someone who I did not know and did not have a
Yes.
relationship with.
Yes.
But there were times that I was very grateful that she brought me into this world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and understood that my strength came from her.
Mm,
Um, and then I was also a little bitter because, especially when she passed away, my sisters who were raised with her, who I was in communication with, they were feeling her loss, and I was
yeah.
not feeling her loss. So then I
Yeah.
was trying to punish myself. I
Mm,
just, why couldn't I cry? It was just so much, right?
mm-hmm.
And then there's the other piece that, um, I was raised by a family who wasn't, my biological family, someone who, family that did not look like me, don't think understood me. So I didn't experience mothering, right?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So as I was becoming a mom, it was a lot about, what not to do versus what to do. I
Uh-huh.
don't
Uh-huh.
want to do what my mom did and give me away. I don't want
Uh-huh.
to do what, the mom that raised me did with me, enough, like not sitting with me, not talking.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I felt like what took over was just like this sense of protection of my children and providing for
Mm,
them
mm-hmm.
is what
Mm-hmm.
took over versus the mothering that it's holistic, right? Like, so
Uh-huh. Yes,
I
yes, I
didn't
do.
know how to mother. It was just all
Uh-huh.
about protection because I didn't want the things that happened to me to happen to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want them to suffer. I didn't want them to go hungry. So it just like, it was all about doing so they wouldn't
Uh-huh.
experience things. And it wasn't
Uh-huh.
about enough about being. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it definitely shifted motherhood for me. Because as goddess came to me, as I started falling into my softness, then I
Mm-hmm.
was able to just see my children more than just bodies that I needed to protect. I was able to see
Right.
their full humanity
Wow.
and know that,
Wow.
I, as a mom, needed to like hug them more, to, talk to them more. Um, and, and that continues to evolve.
Uh-huh.
I need to do a better job at it. Because I still have, my daughter's very affectionate, and I notice that I still get like, okay, that's enough kisses. So,
Okay, we
I,
did that. We can be done now.
yes, I still have a lot of work. And my son the other day, he came up to me. He was like, "When are you going to one of your spiritual retreats? I think you need it again."
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh,
And then when he
wow.
said that, I was like, "Yeah, I've been a little agitated." So like now they like, he literally was like, "I think it's time for you to book another spiritual retreat."
Oh, that's excellent. Okay, I know. Okay, I know we're laughing, but also I just want to say, like, had I been able to say to my mother in my teenage years, "Why don't you go off on a spiritual retreat?" You know what I mean? Like what a difference that might have made. Like, I mean, like, it's hilarious, by the way, and but
So
also like,
funny.
what a thing for your kid to be able to say. Like,
Hmm.
I see
Yeah.
you. I see
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
helps you. So
Mm-hmm.
go, mom, and do that thing.
Yes.
Right? What a kid and what a testimony to your relationship, truly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Katy? What would you say about mothering or
I think I want to start by saying that my getting to know like Lilith, even though I said before that she's always been there. Obviously, um, but it's been pretty recent that I've discovered this. It was
mhm.
a year ago or less than a year ago. And it was because Tuesday, you had us do online goddess quizzes. I was like, what is this divine feminine? I'm like, okay. And I was like, but I'm a nerd. Okay. So I don't do shallow. I just went deep. I did so many goddess quizzes and, it was a lot of fun. And I'm and now I can't get enough learning about all of them, and there's so anyway. Um, and so I think I'm still it's hard for me to answer this question, I think, because I'm still this is still like new. And what I will say is that when I started the just getting quiet and going inward really intentionally, which was 5 years ago, I I knew that I I've always had a lot of I'm a like big feelings is what I guess is one way of putting it. Very, even when I was a kid, like thinking back to I was like, what is going on with all these emotions? And I grew up in a family and I love my parents. Like I had a safe, well provided for, loved upbringing. And one thing, after I had my children was like, I always felt a little foreign in the sense that I had such big emotions. And I struggled with depression. And I know that's also something in my family line. It wasn't the only one, but it was just such an unspoken, you don't talk about it. And also the lack, like it wasn't recognized. Like I was exhibiting very clear signs as like a high schooler, I know, of like a depressed teenager. And no one said anything to me. And I don't fault my parents because I know that they had their own real traumas and neglect that they dealt with. And they, though, we don't talk about it so much, like they adjusted their parenting to like not do what their parents did. Right.
Right.
Yeah. But so, like there wasn't abuse in my household. Like, I know well, that's also a debate. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. All that is to say is that I remember like that feeling of like neglect. And I knew it with my parenting. I was like, okay, I see my kids' feelings and seeing them, and they're like, they are like they're like half my DNA. And so having to like feel through and adjust how I was going to like engage with like children and their feelings, where I didn't have parents that did that. My partner had parents that did that, like really. And so this is the other thing actually that and so he does it very naturally, which is a very interesting thing as for me. And I struggled with, if I'm honest with myself, like felt a little bit of jealousy around, because I'm like, I'm the mother. I'm supposed to like know. And I'm also like, have a lot of, like, I know emotions and, but I did not know how to like communicate or even, and so there was a lot. And I do think having a goddess practice and me getting more in tune with like who I am has helped me to show up in the way that I want to for my kids. But I still think I'm learning. And also just very interesting talking about like the masculine and the feminine, like, I'm married to a man, and it's like, it was such a strange thing in early parenthood to be like, you are so intuitive and doing this so naturally. And I literally I'm afraid to be home with my children, like these children. And it's such a disorient, like, is that?
Yeah.
I mean, I know now, like, that's very common.
Yeah.
But it feels like it was like a hard thing. And me, like, kind of forgiving myself for like, it was okay to like feel that way. And like, so amazing that I had someone who was like, had that confidence and could do things slowly. I was always like speeding around, like, and it's just very interesting reflecting on like just the masculine and the feminine and how, the man in my life, their father, has some of these like feminine qualities that I just hadn't nurtured in myself. And for me to like catch up in a way or like do it and also just to forgive myself for not being that at that time.
I think I think both of you kind of have been kind of so honest about your parenting and where you are and where you aren't, and what you're working on or not. And I think that it's an underselling of goddess to be like, okay, this is how mothering is. It's like the soft, gentle, nurturing, like like what we all know is there is that fierce goddess of like, keep my babies safe, right? Or the kind of like, well, I don't know what to do with those big feelings, but I'm going to create all the conditions you need to be okay with them, right? Which isn't like the like leaning in. And I know you all know because you know me, and I think I've even mentioned on this podcast, like the gentle, nurturing mother goddesses are just way harder for me to tune into. They just not, it's not naturally who I am as a mom. Like, and I could not love my children more, but I did have to get to a point where I was like, I'm the mom they got. You know what I mean? Like, I would love it if I was like these things. Like, I always used to laugh when they were kids and be like, did they everybody else got a manual. I didn't. I didn't know you're supposed to put them in orange on Halloween. Like, who knows that? Like, I didn't know. Right. You know, like, just like, I just like, it's like, I feel like there's a manual. I just didn't get it. And it took me a really long time and I still struggle with it. But like, I'm the mom I am. And I have this lineage of a goddess who has motherly characteristics, but like, that's not exactly what she leads with all the time, you know? And so like, so just kind of being like, oh, right. There are like lots of different ways to be a mother, even in her image, right? Even in what she is. And I think that's that can take some work. I want to ask you, because I know we're kind of moving toward the end, but I want to ask you, Katy, you mentioned writing practices, but I'm curious with both of you, what are the practices that you connect and kind of like practice your devotion? And I want to know like, what practices do you do and what practices like, are you like, nope, that's not for me?
Well, I always, because this was so new to me a year ago, I remember Tuesday, you're like, you can set up an altar, and I've just never done that. I'm just gonna be honest. I've
Uh-huh.
and I have all these ideas of things I would put on, and I've just maybe I will do it one day. For me, it is I have divination practices which tap me, and so I will draw a tarot card. But the writing really is the way I channel and hear. Again, I don't differentiate me from her. So like
Uh-huh.
what I hear, so
Great.
I that's how I tune in. And the writing is really important. I've started doing like even prayer and like,
Great.
which is really very interesting to me because like I said, I grew up Catholic and I've like very much rejected. And so for me to get comfortable getting back to the practices I grew up with, but doing them in a way
Right.
that feel is right for me. But the writing for me is so
Mm-hmm.
key, and meditation, which I know a lot of people talk about meditation, but for me, it's getting out of my like thinking mind.
Mm-hmm.
Getting it's almost like self hypnosis, where I'm like in another. I, I'm connected
Mm-hmm.
to like source. I'm just
Yes.
connected in a way to things, beings. It's been quite amazing for me to tap in at that and feel so connected to, I don't know, like my lineage, to the mythic, to mystery.
I love it. I love that you don't have an altar. I think that's hilarious because I think that people assume, right? If I'm going to have a goddess practice, well, where's my altar? You know what I mean? It's almost like that's what it's got to be. I just love that you don't even have it. I think it's great. I mean, that's going to be your homework before I see you next. No, I'm just teasing. I'm totally teasing. Totally. I just leave people to practice, but no, I love it. I love it. How about you, Dalida? What practices bring you closer and what ones just like don't work for you?
Writing, definitely. I
Mm.
journal like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Not a poet, but I do write. I do have lots of appreciation for poets.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have right now, actually, I'm sort of in between this, I'm feeling this something came to me, was just like I cleared my altar and I need space to figure out what is
Mm.
emerging before I can
Mm-hmm.
set another altar.
Great.
But I do have a canvas of goddess Oshun, and then I have Ma Durga,
Ah.
both, because both have, Durga showed up for me about a year ago, or less than a year ago, but last fall. And it was just like I was, just sitting in front of the altar, meditating and praying. And she just was like, showed up and was like, here's what you're gonna do. Boom, boom, boom. And I was like, you know, and then she showed up again, um, in early January. And I was just like, and again, it's like that, motherly energy
Mm.
that is, but
Mhm.
also like just very, I'm gonna hold you and I'm gonna tell you what you need to do.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Like you at work, for example,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay, both of you sound so certain, but I know both of your journeys. And so like what do you do about doubt? Do you ever experience doubt? Do you ever wonder that you're making it up? Do you ever wonder that people are going to think you're crazy? Talk to me about doubt and self-consciousness.
Oh man, this is a good one. Definitely had, uh, definitely had fear and doubt, right? And again, Goddess made sure that she showed up in a way that would leave me without doubt. So at first, it
Mm.
was in that,
Mm.
that stage of like doing research, but also feeling a little scared of just like, I believe in God, and it's like, yes, but have a mom and a dad. So why can I have a mom
Mm.
and a dad? Yeah, God and a goddess,
Mhm.
So like that helped me just to like lean more into goddess, that is not one or the other. And I've also realized how in life I was constantly feeling like I had to be one thing or the other thing, pick one thing or the other thing. And it was just like, there
Ah.
was the first time in life that I was like, there is a both and here,
Mm.
there's like, we can lean into abundance, which has like radicalized my life.
Oh, love it.
um, and and also there was another time, there was a moment I would feel scared, and that I was betraying God or
Uh-huh.
something of that nature, and something that has been happening, which I don't really like to talk about, but it's just now it's part of my life, where I do my prayer before I go to bed and I go to sleep, and then I get these random message for people, and then I don't choose
Mhm.
who, and then I call the next day. I was like, "Hey, I got this message for you," and the person would go, "Yes, how did you know about that?" Oh, and then I was
Wow.
like, "Okay."
Wow.
And it's just like keeps happening. Sometimes I'm afraid to call
Mm.
my friends and be like, "Hey, I got this message," because it also feels like I'm just like intruding in their life without their permission.
Uh-huh.
Because then sometimes some of them will just start telling me they're like everything. I'm like, I don't need to know everything. Just this is what the message. And some others are just looking at me like, "What are you doing? Are you like doing brujeria out here?" And I'm
Uh-huh.
just like, so that was another point where it was just like, I felt like with God, it was like, I'm just gonna show you so you can
Mhm.
believe it. Um, and there was something else that happened to me the other day, and I felt like I was in a moment of doubt again. And Goddess was just like very clear, and I was like, okay, I give in. It'll come to me. If it come to me, I'll tell you. But it was something along those lines of just showed me exactly the
Uh-huh.
thing, and I was just like, okay,
Great. So you don't have to wonder for long. Something
nope,
comes back.
yeah.
How about you, Katie?
So, I listened to your first podcast episode Tuesday, and you talked about the coming out of the closet, and like this project is that, the podcast is that, and the spiritual closet, and I feel that way. Like I have deep being like seen. It's in,
Mhm.
and it shows up in many ways, and and learning through this, my intuitive practices. I mean, and Tuesday, you know this, I've also been learning to read the Akashic Records.
Mhm.
And that's a practice I do now almost daily. And that's one way to
Mhm.
receive messages from all sorts of messages from all
Yeah.
sorts of, and learning about myself and my like lineage, that like we're a family of witches. Like,
Yeah.
and it was like I was going to get here one way or another. Like it was
Mm,
just going to happen. And um me becoming comfortable with those, like,
Mhm.
I guess I'll call them gifts, or yeah, even like saying that feels weird. But uh I do still struggle with the doubt.
Mhm.
It's not even so much doubt, it's fear.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
and it's fear on a few different levels. It's fear of being called crazy,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
comes with like, there's all kinds of like history around that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
fear, you know, I can like but like peel those layers of the fear. But also then there's part of me was like, it doesn't really matter to me so much if
Mm.
people believe me, if that it's true. It sources me.
Uh-huh.
It feels true to me. I don't need to
Yes.
have evidence or proof
Uh-huh.
of like
Yes.
this great 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 grandmother on my mother's line was, like I don't have it. Like,
Yeah.
but I know because it's information that's like in my body and it was going to come up one way or another. I remember during the pandemic, I had this thought, and I wasn't even doing research around trauma. I was like, why this depression I keep having? It was like
Mm.
this like, reoccurring thing. I'm like, I can't point to like specific things happening to me. And I was like, it must be in my DNA. Like I must have inherited like
Ah.
this.
Uh-huh.
It must be like trauma must be inherited. It just like occurred to me as a thought. And then I went and did research. I was like, that's like a real thing. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
epigenetics. Like,
That's right.
and so
That's
realizing
right.
like I was receiving like messages from like it was coming from
Uh-huh.
somewhere.
Right.
And I was going to end up at this point one way or another. And I just have to like, I've decided to just not like let the doubt stop me because it's like it's this like magnet pulling me toward it. I want to spend more time in it. It sources me. It gives me really good direction and guidance. It gives me discernment that I haven't had
Uh-huh.
in my
Right.
adult years.
Right.
And like it doesn't matter if it's real. Like
Yeah.
who
Exactly.
cares?
Yeah.
like,
I
like
love that. I love
Yes.
that. I love
so
that.
it's funny too. I'll just say because I was like raised Catholic and then but didn't totally like believe it, just like tradition. And then I was like, I'm an atheist, but then I didn't totally believe that either.
Mm.
And because I still felt this, like if I was, like I saw a beautiful piece of art, I would just feel the divine come through. I'm like, if I would see someone sing a song, I was like, how is that not God? Or,
Uh-huh.
like I was in the presence of it. I felt it physically. And even though I would say like I'm an atheist. And so now I've come to like, I just don't need to like have the rational explanation for all of
Uh-huh.
these things.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
Oh my gosh.
Um, yeah,
I
it's
love that. I love that.
as rational as I am, like I'm just it's a weird
Right.
place to be, but
Right.
doesn't matter.
What an interesting, like as I think about the world outside of these walls that we're in and how hard it is out there right now. Um,
Mhm.
I just like it just had to occur to me like what would be possible if we actually didn't need to justify or rationalize, if we could actually just go with
Yeah.
what we felt. I mean, I know that could be a recipe for lots of kinds of disaster, but also I'm just like, what if like these things that we just know to be true, right? That if we could
Yeah.
just move on them.
Mm.
We're going to start to close, but I always ask people if they have a question for me. You do not have to, but it feels like I've been interviewing you, and so it just feels fair to ask. Is there anything you want to ask me?
I feel like softness is such a medicine that
Mm.
have and gifted to the world. It's so easy to fall into my softness next to you. So I
Mm.
just want to know, is is that like, do you believe that it was something that you have named was just like softness is my medicine, especially as you were
Mhm.
talking about motherhood and just like
Uh-huh.
that's not the part that you lean into at first. And I'm just like, how can that not be? Because I melt when I'm next to you.
Oh. Oh, Dálida, that makes me so happy. And Katie, you're nodding too. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think that you know how you just have blind spots about yourself. And I
Mm,
think that because I feel surprised to hear you say that. So I think that
Mm.
there's just like this lack of knowing of that in myself, right?
mm,
That I think I need friends and people to like hold a mirror up so I can see. I
Mhm.
remember someone telling me in my early 30s, like, you're so feminine. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, like just like nothing in that resonated for me about myself. And then I just kind of had to be like, oh, I guess there are these different ways, right? That I
mm,
hadn't even considered. So I would say, um, it might be natural to me. I feel like the way I am around you all is very natural to me. Like I'm just like totally free to be myself. So if you tell me that that's soft, then I am going to believe you and just like be grateful and say, oh, okay, maybe I need to believe what the mirror is telling me.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say too, adding to that is back to the doubt and fear of being seen is having you in the last year. Like
Mm,
hold the mirror up to me and um share your story with Goddess and
mm,
also discover through you and your gifts parts of me that and you did it in a way that I felt it was like it I felt back at home in my body. Like I'm coming
mm,
back home in a different, like I said, the puzzle pieces have shifted and I'm coming back home, but I'm different. And you showed me things that I think if I would have discovered them, I think because I had to,
mhm,
but you did it in a way that I didn't feel any fear. I was like, that makes so much sense. I was like, I,
Oh,
I'm like, how did I? And so that's back to your softness
mm.
and so many other just things about you that are, yeah. Thank you,
Oh,
Tuesday.
thank you both so much. Thank you both. Thank you both so much. I'm just receiving it and saying to you both that the Luminosity Intensive was for me like
Mm.
something I needed to do because I
Mhm.
wanted kindreds. I knew there had to be other women out there who were kind of kick ass in all these areas of their life and discovering Goddess and wanting to be in their more intuitive ways of knowing. And so it has just been such a blessing for me to have the two of you in my life and as mirrors and as kindreds. And I'm so grateful you're here. I'm so grateful you're
Mm.
here. Thank you so, so much. I like to end with a practice. And so
Yeah.
since you both are writers, I want to give people just a writing practice. Um, and um, and I think maybe, this will just be like a free writing. Obviously, folks who are listening, this is just like comes from our conversation. So I'm just going to ask people to set your timer for 5 minutes and free writing. And what that means is like you put your pen down and you start to write and you just don't let the pen rise until your 5 minutes is over. You start a timer. You don't stop and think about what you're going to write. You just let yourself write. And I think the question that you maybe could write on is something like, what would the stillness tell me?
Mm.
You both mentioned stillness, getting quiet. And so maybe if you just like write at the top of your paper, what would the stillness tell me? And then set your timer for 5 minutes and just write and see what comes up. Just see what comes up. Thank you both. It's been so good to be with you. I'm so grateful. This is a time where I should say rate, review, blah, 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 the podcast. But, and please do all those things. That would be amazing. But also just share it with someone. If you want people to know Katy and Dalida's story or just to know if you think they have an inkling of Goddess or please just send this podcast along and I'd be really grateful.